Okay, so today's lesson's on the psychodynamic approach. What do you need to know? You need to know the role of the unconscious, the structure of personality, that is the id, ego and superego, defense mechanisms including repression, denial and displacement, and psychosexual stages. This is on page 118, 119 of your course textbook. The psychodynamic approach is one of the earliest approaches in psychology. It was established after Wundt and his introspection and before behaviourism. The main figure in the psychodynamic theory is Freud. Freud was a trained neurologist and he took a biological approach to illness. He mostly treated hysteria and applied findings from abnormal patients to normal development. It was about the late 1800s. So, what are the key assumptions of the approach? Basically, they believe that unconscious processes of which we are unaware determine our behaviour. That we have a personality which has three parts: the id, the ego, and the superego. And our early childhood experiences determine our adult personality. So let's have a look at the first assumption, the role of the unconscious. According to the theory, we have an unconscious mind which influences our behaviour. Our conscious mind is unaware of what thoughts and emotions occur in our unconscious mind. However, these unconscious thoughts and feelings affect our conscious mind and therefore our behaviour. This is known as psychic determinism. Freud suggested there are three parts to our consciousness. First, the conscious, the small amount of mental activity we know about, the thoughts and perceptions, the things that you're thinking in your head right now. Then we have our preconscious, things we could be aware of if we wanted to or tried. So memory or stored knowledge, things that we think back about. So like, for example, a big argument you had on your 5th birthday. And the unconscious, things we are unaware of and cannot be aware of. These are instincts, these are deeply buried memories of something really bad that may have happened that we can't remember. Freud used this metaphor of this iceberg to describe the mind. The tip of the iceberg is visible, but a much larger part is hidden under the surface, which is our unconscious. So how do we access our unconscious mind? Freud did things through dream analysis. He said that dreams were the royal road to the unconscious. Our repressed ideas in the unconscious are more likely to appear in dreams than when we are awake. Freud referred to these as latent content of dreams. And the manifest content is the dream as it appears to the dreamer. So, for example, when you're dreaming about flying or turning up at work with no clothes on, for example. Okay, these dream symbols are used to disguise unacceptable ideas. The therapist interprets the dreams in order to provide an insight about what the dream really represents. He also used something called free association. This is where an individual is encouraged to relax and say anything that comes to their mind, no matter how absurd. The idea is that the ego will be unable to carry out this normal role of keeping in check the unconscious impulses, and we may say something that can lead the therapist to interpret our unconscious. So, let's have a look at Troy's personality theory. His tripart means composed of three parts. Behaviour is seen to be the result of a compromise between three parts of your psyche or your personality. These are the id, your instincts, the ego, the reality, and your superego, morality. Let's have a look at each in turn. So your id. This is the selfish bit. This is your sort of instinctual part of your body or your thoughts. It's the kind of the primary processes. It's the pleasure principle. It's all about getting what you want. Okay, it's driven by your primary instincts. So food, sex, water, shelter. So basically it's all about thinking about yourself, the id. It springs from two instinctive drives that all humans possess. Eros, which is fueled by the psychic energy of the libido. Your libido is your sexual drive. And Phantos, which is the death instinct. Then you've got your superego. The superego is your conscience. Okay, the superego is a relentless policeman. It is constantly telling you what you should do and what you shouldn't do. Okay, it's your morals. It opposes the desires of the id. Okay, so it's the opposite. It's the bit that keeps the id in check and battles against the id. It develops later in childhood through identifications with one's parents, at which point a child will internalise these moral rules, which is why toddlers, for example, they don't seem to have so much of a superego, and they're very much all about what they want and what they desire and don't think about or take other people into account. Then you've got your ego. The ego is the executive of the personality, basically the guy who's in charge. The ego uses its cognitive abilities to manage and control the id and balance its desires, its wants, with the restrictions of reality, the morals, the superego. The ego operates according to the reality principle. We can't always have what we want. But then again, there's always a bit of compromise. The ego defends itself from the id, superego, and struggles to do this via various defense mechanisms. So, what happens if we don't keep in check the id and the superego? Well, a healthy psyche is when this is actually happening, so the ego is in charge. The neurotic psyche is when the superego is in charge. In this case, the person often will suffer from high anxiety levels. Then we've got the psychotic psyche. This is when the id is in charge, and basically the ego and the superego don't have much chance. It's all about sex, food, drink, drugs, and that. Lastly, you've got your psychopathic psyche. This is basically when there is no id and ego, pretty much. And in actual fact, your moral compass is way out. Okay? This is the type of things we suggest that perhaps when you see those sort of murderers on television depicted in films, etc., or quite often they will have a psychopathic psyche. So let's move on to the defense mechanisms. The ego uses many defense mechanisms to protect it from the id and ego. We call these repression, denial, and displacement. So let's have a look at them. So repression, forcing a distressing memory from your conscious mind, so not thinking about it. Then denial, refusing to believe something because it's too painful to acknowledge the reality. And lastly, displacement, transferring the feelings from a true source of distress or emotion to a substitute target. So getting cross with someone else when actually you're really, really cross with your mum or your dad, and you get cross with your friend. So that's displacement. Okay, a couple of examples. An individual forgetting the trauma of their favourite pet dying, that's repression. Denial, continuing to turn up for work every day even though you've been sacked. And displacement, slamming the door after a row with your girlfriend. So you're taking it out on the door, basically. Everyone uses defence mechanisms from time to time. Excessive use of defence mechanisms will, over time, result in the ego becoming increasingly detached from the reality and in time can cause a psychological disorder. Psychoanalysis involves effort into understanding the defences and unconscious motives driving self-destructive behaviours. So basically trying to understand the defence mechanisms that we are using to understand the unconscious problems. So lastly, the importance of early childhood experiences. Psychodynamic theory states that events in our childhood have a great influence on our adult lives and shaping our personality. Events that occur in childhood can remain in the unconscious and cause problems as adults. Freud proposed that all children go through the same 5 stages of development. He called these the psychosexual stages of development. Children pass through a series of age-dependent stages during development. Each stage has a designated pleasure zone and primary activity. Each stage requires resolution of particular conflict. Failure to successfully navigate the stage's particular conflict is known as fixation and can cause changes in adult personality later on in life. So let's have a look at what these are. The 5 stages. First is the oral stage. This is age between 0 and 1. This is when they're sort of really fixated and draw pleasure from sucking things. The anal stage, 1 to 3 years of age. This is basically the sort of age where children start understanding potty training, and they get a lot of pleasure from actually doing a poo. The phallic stage, 3 to 5, 6 years of age. This is when children start understanding their genitalia and gaining pleasure from little boys always like holding on to their winky about this age. And then lastly, you've got the latent stage. This is age 6 to 11. In the latent phase, this is where earlier conflicts can be repressed. And lastly, the genital stage. This is years 12 plus. This is when sexual desires become conscious alongside the onset of puberty. A good way to remember these is old age pensioners love Guinness. Oral, anal, phallic, latent and genital. So, how is your personality affected by the psychosexual stages of development? Fixation. Getting stuck at any one stage determines our adult character, personality and behavioural traits. If this happens, traces of that stage will remain in the behaviour as an adult. Fixation may occur due to trauma, pleasant or unpleasant experiences and a change in environment. I'll give you an example. An oral fixation might be smoking or biting your nails or being sarcastic. Some people talk about people being anally retentive. They become a perfectionist, obsessive, or anally expulsive, thoughtless, messy. A phallic personality, they often be narcissistic, reckless, and possibly, according to Freud, homosexual. And if there's issues in the genital phase, he suggests that they may have difficulty forming a relationship. So, in evaluation, the strength of the approach has been that it was exceptionally influential into the beginning of psychology and really got us to think about how things that happen in our childhood can affect us later on in life. It also does have some useful applications in therapy, like psychoanalysis. This therapy benefits from the release of pent-up tensions. This is what we call catharsis. But some of his methods weren't particularly good. But really, I suppose it's the first starting of talk therapy where people can talk about their problems and make them feel better. Limitations of the approach. Mainly, Freud used a case study method, and it's largely derived from adults who already have emotional disorders, which is an extremely unrepresentative sample. It is based on, because it's based on case studies, it's very subjective and open to bias. For example, the story of Little Hans. It's very unscientific, as the ideas cannot be refuted, which makes it unfalsifiable, which is Popper. Can't be refuted because the ideas like id, ego, superego, stages of the unconscious and psychosexual stages are all things that we can't measure. Psychoanalytic therapy is difficult to evaluate. It's normally extremely long, and it's totally impossible to know that the individual may recover of their own accord during this time. The approach is also deterministic and very pessimistic. It explains all behaviour is determined by the unconscious conflicts which are rooted in childhood, and any free will we have is an illusion. So, just a couple of key points for the summary. Unconscious, tripart theory, defence mechanisms, psychosexual stages, and psychic determinism. So the essay you're going to have to write is discuss the psychodynamic approach in your answer and refer to at least 2 other approaches in psychology. I'll talk you through how to answer this in lesson.